Hello, everybody. Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Great, thank you. Greetings from South Africa, where it's 7 p.m. on a Saturday night. Quick intro. My name is Teresa Hardman. I am trained as an architect, but I'm also an artist. I'm a dancer, I'm a teacher, and I'm a writer. I've taught design and drawing to architecture students and other students for 30 years. And this presentation has its roots in my experience as a very, very young teacher who in the architectural design studio who didn't know how to teach design. And Dr. Sawyer's just mentioned that a lot of the professors say they don't try and teach creativity. I was really determined to learn how to teach people to be creative. And this set me up on a journey of reading and researching creativity research, anything I could get my hands on, creative education research, because in my experience, my students were afraid of exploring, of experimenting, and they stuck with safe options of things that they knew in terms of design or things that they saw in journals. And I wanted to get authenticity out of my students. I wanted them to find their unique personal voice and express that. So, and I also wanted to undo 12 years of mental conditioning from high school, where you're afraid of making mistakes. So, and so my research began, and it still continues. But the thing that I was most interested in was the mysterious and very personal experience of insight, where an idea comes to you and you don't really know how or where from, but it just feels right and it feels true to yourself. That was what I was interested in. I didn't even have a name for it at the time, but after many years of reading, I discovered that it was called creative intuition. It's that flash of insight, or it's the seed. It's like a seed, the germ of an idea that just sets your thinking in a specific direction, and something which shows a lot of potential to become something. And this is whether it's during the design process or during a conversation with someone, or while painting or drawing, or even problem solving. We have these hunches or insights, and I wanted to know how that works and how I can nurture this in myself and in my students. Personally, I'd experienced many of these insights as a dancer, as a designer, and as a painter. So understanding creative intuition ultimately became the subject for my PhD thesis, which I completed in 2019. And today I'll share with you a few key concepts around it. It's a huge subject, but I'm going to pack in as much as I can. My teachers along the way have been from various backgrounds. From psychology, I've learned mainly from Carl Jung and his scholars. From Western philosophy, my teachers have been Henri Bergson, Jacques Maritain, William James, Gilles Deleuze, Heidegger, and others. And from Eastern philosophy, I've learned a lot from Zen Buddhism and Taoism. I also read extensively into the biographies of creative people. I listened to interviews, and I really try to get into the minds of the people that I admire in the creative world. And in many personal accounts, I read about these fleeting moments of sudden illumination, similar to what Emily Dickinson calls a blossom of the brain. I love that. So that is what I'm interested in. So let me share my screen. Sorry, I'm just trying to share. Why am I not able to? So there we go. Share slideshow. There we go. Okay, so understanding creative intuition is the topic of my talk. I'll start off by posing the question, what is creativity? Well, I do realize that I'm speaking to a whole range of creativity experts at this conference, and I'm absolutely honored to be here and be talking with people whose work I've respected and read for so many years. So I'm not going to go too much into what is creativity, but for my purposes, creativity is bringing something new into the world which is of value. It's useful to us, it's interesting, it has intellectual content, and it is authentic. My research findings and my presentation are applicable to creativity in all forms, in the visual arts, in the business world, in the scientific world, as well as in everyday life. So I'm talking generally about creativity in the world. The next big question is, what is intuition? So I posed this on the chat at the beginning of the conference and got some interesting answers. But my definition of intuition is knowing that you know something without knowing how you know it. So there are no rational processes involved. Intuition occurs throughout daily life. And in fact, Carl Jung said it's one of the 4 psychological functions of being human, the others being thinking, feeling, and sensation. So we all have this quality within us. We're born with it. But what happens along the way when we get schooled and we get this mental conditioning that happens during high school is that we lose touch with this. So I really wanted to try and understand it. Jung describes intuition as the perception of possibilities inherent in a situation. And he considers intuition to be an unconscious process whose primary function is simply to transmit images or relationships between things. So there are no words involved in intuition. It's imagistic, and it involves fleeting holistic insights, which also show relationships. So next question, what is creative intuition? How does intuition work during the creative process? One of the most extensive surveys of the process of scientific discovery, including the role of intuition, was made during the 1950s by the mathematician and psychologist Michael Polanyi. And I read that extensively. He studied scientists' descriptions of how they had these sudden insights and breakthroughs into a new view of reality. Now, we're talking about scientists, so this is quite exciting. We know more than we can tell, he said. He found that reason, logic, and data collection came relatively late in the process of scientific investigation. And scientists first used other ways of knowing. And Einstein has been quoted several times where he refers to a kind of a bodily sensation of knowing that he should go in this direction. So absolutely non-rational, rather supra-rational. Jacques Hadamard also spoke about the psychology of invention in the mathematical field. And in 1995, creativity researcher Emma Policastro cites ample evidence of intuition as an aspect of the creative process. But she calls for intuition to be disentangled from overly mysterious connotations so that it can be examined more objectively and scientifically. And so my research is aiming to do that, to contribute to a better understanding of creative intuition. Right, so now I'm going to move on to Wallace's 4-stage model of the creative process, which was referred to in the last talk by Dr. Sawyer. And even though it is a very, very old model, it is one with which I'm familiar as an architect. So the first stage of the creative process is preparation. And this is, as an architect, we get a brief or a program. As an artist, you might get a theme that you want to explore. And you immerse yourself in the world of the world as it is, in the area with which you would like to be involved. And yes, constraints are really, really important in the design process. So it's a hunter-gatherer phase where we gather as much information, we try and understand things, attention is focused, thinking is analytical and conscious. The next stage is incubation. And the incubation stage involves letting go of the problem. Going back to everyday activities for a length of time, sometimes days, weeks, or even months, where you allow things to simmer and you allow the unconscious to work its way. By resuming everyday activities, your mind is relaxed, and when your mind is relaxed, that is when the unconscious provides insight. This is followed by illumination, the aha moment, where Insight comes while you're having a shower or driving long distance, walking on the beach, or walking the dog. Happens to me often while I'm walking the dog. Insight is normally fleeting, it's holistic, and it doesn't come in stages. And when I say it's fleeting, it's instantaneous, and you have to record it as soon as you can. The last stage, verification, you go back to rational analysis to verify if you are in the right direction, if you're going in the right track. And as Dr. Sawyer said, this process is cyclic and it is iterative. It is not linear. You can go backwards and forwards between these stages often. But the important thing is that the creative process is a mysterious and delicate dance between unconscious and unconscious processes. The unconscious happens during the incubation period, but also during the verification period. Sometimes we intuitively know that an answer is correct. So, creative intuition, what did I learn in my research? I learned that intuition, as it applies to creativity, has 4 broad qualities or principles underlying it. And these are interrelated, they occur simultaneously, they cannot be separated from one another. They're not hierarchical, and so there are facets of the same phenomenon, but in order to explain them, I need to deal with them one by one. So here goes. Intuition first involves a state of expanded consciousness. Secondly, it relies on an open, fluid way of being. Thirdly, it requires a focus on the particular. And lastly, it is an experience of fusion through emotion. Now, I'm going to go through each of these at length, so you'll see what I mean. Firstly, what do I mean by a state of expanded consciousness? Well, the big question is, what do I mean by consciousness? Consciousness has been explored by thinkers in philosophy, psychology, religion, neuroscience. I've come across so many theories of consciousness, and each of these elaborates on a specific aspect of consciousness. But for my research and for my understanding of intuition, I define consciousness as an awareness of both an internal reality as well as an external reality. So it is being aware. It is a relationship between yourself and reality. We all know what it is like to be conscious, but it's very difficult to explain what it is like to be unconscious, or even to describe liminal states of consciousness, because these are they're non-verbal. So we start off with Freud's theory of the unconscious, where he regards it's known as the iceberg model, where the conscious level is only a fraction of consciousness, with the unconscious being a vertically down. It's an intrapsychic locality, and the deeper you go, the more unconscious things are. The unconscious, to Freud, contained repressed things like desires, irrational things. There you see the words. And according to Freud, you could not access the unconscious. It would only make itself known through Freudian slips and through dreams. The preconscious level was ideals and morals, which can be accessed at will. Jung's model of consciousness expanded on Freud's, and for Jung, his theory of consciousness really provides the most insight into the nature of intuition. But we first need to understand what Jung means by consciousness, because he relates consciousness to ego, and this is really, really important. He states that we're only conscious of something if once we have reflected on it, thought about it, and appropriated it or made it our own through our ego. And ego being that fixed personal identity that you regard yourself as having, that is separate from everything else. So only when you have noticed something, thought about it, made it your own, through as a human being with ego, is it conscious to you. However, the unconscious is all that we have not reflected on, not experienced, or not experienced mentally, indeed, and accepted as our own. So the unconscious is to Jung a quality of life that is lived but not reflectively known. So many people can be said to be living unconscious lives. To Jung, the unconscious is a kind of world relationship which is brimming with potential. It contains lost memories, fantasies, dreams, and materials that have been associating in your unconscious, and they've not yet emerged into consciousness. So this relationship of ego to consciousness is very, very important, because the collective unconscious, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious are totally devoid of ego consciousness. The collective unconscious is very much a field consciousness, very similar to current quantum field consciousness theories David Bohm and John Hagelin have put forward, where they describe the field of consciousness as a sea of energy through which we're all connected. And Bohm sees the sea of consciousness as a unified field, very similar to the Buddhist concept of Indra's net. So that relates to Jung's collective unconscious. But Jung's personal unconscious, he also relates to the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is a nervous system that we're unaware of, we don't control it, and it operates throughout the whole body and experiences life holistically, as opposed to the cerebrospinal system. Now, I also want to touch upon liminal states of consciousness, which, sorry, I just a sip of water. Between conscious and unconscious, there are several varied states of consciousness, which I call hybrid states of consciousness. The hypnagogic state is one where we're falling asleep and we have that fuzzy dreamlike period where we're kind of between conscious and unconscious. Hypnopompic is when we're waking up. Again, we dreamlike and not quite clear. We have hallucinations maybe through illness or through sickness or drugs even. We have proper dream states where we're not aware physically, but we are aware mentally. Paul McCartney, in an interview with the BBC, describes how he woke up one morning and the song Yesterday was fully formed in his mind. All he had to do was write it down. So these in-between states of consciousness are really, really important because they are what link the conscious to the unconscious, and they are the source of creativity. Salvador Dali, the painter, actually devised ways in which to stimulate these hybrid states of consciousness. So he'd sit in a chair, lie back with a key in his hand and a metal plate on the floor. He would doze off, and as the key dropped onto the metal plate, he'd wake up, and in that hypnopompic state, he would record his flashes of insight. So he literally created these states of consciousness, and he famously said, "I don't do drugs, I am drugs." Quite an interesting guy. So I'm also interested in not doing drugs, but I'm interested in the experience. Another thing is that people often think of a consciousness as being in the head, but as early as 1945, Merleau-Ponty pointed out that consciousness is more than a state of mind. Challenging Freud's view, it is rather an ambiguous lived relationship of the entire body with the world. Consciousness is embodied in that the body itself is conscious of its relationship to the world. Every cell in our bodies is conscious of every other cell, and it's also conscious of the reality. So Roger Brooke elaborates on this and refers to it as world relatedness, the quality of the person's relationship to the world through body, mind, and heart. So even Jung described the body as a form of intelligence or a creative receptor. To quote Jung, what you think with your head does not necessarily coincide with what you feel in your heart. And what your belly thinks is not what your mind thinks. So there are different ways of knowing the world, and this is what I'm interested in. Together, all these different ways are what I call an expanded state of consciousness. Now, if we need to understand consciousness as a relationship with reality, we need to understand what I mean by reality. And there are many definitions, again, of reality, but I have drawn from the philosophies of Henri Bergson, as well as Zen Buddhism, as these help me to understand the nature of intuition. Henri Bergson the most influential philosopher of intuition, describes the fundamental nature of reality as being in a state of perpetual change. He calls it flux or la durée or duration, and he describes it as being a continuous interpenetrating flow of experience, which is continually expanding outwards with no preordained goal in mind. The nature of life is that it has no goal, it has no, we can't predict what's going to happen. The future is always in a state of becoming. It is open-ended and unpredictable. And despite all our plans and projects, we actually don't even know what will happen in the next few seconds. Bergson actually claims that the role of life, the purpose of being alive, is to insert uncertainty into the world. And life certainly is unpredictable, as we found out. Both Bergson and Zen Buddhism regard reality as a sort of emptiness, continuous, fluid, changing emptiness, but that doesn't mean there's literally nothing out there. Rather, it refers to the fact that nothing in itself can exist. Things only exist as a result of interfusion or dependent arising. All things are in flux. No individual person has a permanent fixed identity. We're constantly changing physically, mentally, emotionally, in every way. So emptiness or sunyata is considered to be a condition of potential. It is always wanting to become something, yet it is nothing in itself from moment to moment. So there are two ways of knowing this reality. The first is through the intellect, and the second is through intuition. And this, I quote from Bergson again. When we know the world through the intellect or the rational mind, we experience things, we give them names, we label, we categorize, we draw conclusions about things. We form concepts in our minds, which we then communicate to others and to ourselves through words, through language. And these are symbols, but they're ultimately symbols and not the real thing. In the process of creating these symbols, we have to edit and contract reality in order to be able to convey it through a concept. And we're actually taking away so much of what is actually a very messy and complex reality. We're turning things into generalized abstract thought. So we see a tree, we give it a name, we think we understand it, and we move on. Intuition, however, works differently. It works with the whole body. It works with mind, body, and heart. There are no concepts or symbols involved. It is holistic. It takes in everything at once. It is a direct experience of life itself. And it is fluid. It understands that from moment to moment, everything is changing. I am changing, the tree is changing, the environment is changing, everything is changing. It's highly personal and it's fleeting. And it reveals itself to us in images with no words. We get hunches, we get feelings about things, and these feelings drive us in the direction of ideas. And this is creative intuition at work. So it is a broadening and a deepening of awareness. So the second principle of creative intuition is that it relies on an open, fluid state of way of being. So if we accept Bergson's theory that the nature of life is open and fluid and unpredictable, then surely if we want to connect deeply with reality, we ourselves need to be open and fluid. But this isn't how we normally operate in the world. In a purpose-driven world, we want to feel comfortable. We want to know. We don't feel comfortable with not knowing. We like to feel in control of life by operating within a narrow range of ego consciousness, through which we're able to collect, filter, edit, and control. But when we identify with reality like this, we're only aware of a fraction of what we really are and of what reality is. We tend then to think in comfortable and familiar patterns, and we repeat things mindlessly. We make familiar and often mindless choices because they have worked before and they're safe. But this is not the way in which we can access intuition. If we want to access intuition, we need to become fluid and open. We need to take down our mental and intellectual armor, which can be quite a scary thing to do. It requires from us a certain vulnerability, a state of consciousness that is open, and a way of being that is almost like surrendering to whatever is without prejudging or feeling the need to categorize or control or name. Stephen Spender, the author, calls it achieving nakedness. The intuitive creative self is characterized by a generosity and an expansiveness of being, not a contraction into ego consciousness. You open yourself up to what is in the world, and you connect with it. So because intuitive knowledge is so rooted in experience, we find that artists and poets and deeply creative people almost kind of feel their way through life, and they're quite happy to be in the state of vulnerability. Henry Miller, the author, says, I had to learn to think, feel, and see in a totally new fashion, in an uneducated way. He had to undo his education in my own way, which is the hardest thing in the world. I had to throw myself into the current, knowing that I'd probably sink. That is what I'm talking about. And of course, there's fear. Georgia O'Keeffe says, I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, but I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing I wanted to do. And creativity researchers repeatedly identify fear as the big thing that gets in the way of the creative process. Fear of mediocrity, fear of failure. But as creative beings, we need to acknowledge fear and work with it, work through it, and realize that it is just a natural response to anything new. Henry James advises us to stop thinking and to surrender to invasive floods, which are beyond your control. He also says, begin it and it will grow. Whatever you want to do, begin it and it will grow. So, learning from Taoism and Zen, how to conquer or control the ego. Taoist philosophy regards the ego as a hard core, which keeps us contracted and small in a very wide, dynamic, and expansive universe. So it doesn't kind of make sense. Losing the ego is seen as the goal of Taoist transformation, in that you are then able to become one with the processes of life. And it's only by operating beyond ego consciousness that you can connect with the world sympathetically. Zen Buddhist philosophy also teaches that the ego is a superficial mental construct, which keeps us experiencing from life in its fullness. Our true nature is that we are not fixed entities. We are fluid, interpenetrating flows of energy, thoughts, perceptions, emotions, cells, liquids, all sorts of things which are changing from moment to moment. So self-consciousness is really a very big enemy to creativity, because we then tend to compare ourselves to other selves, maybe the self we have been, as well as other selves in our field. And that's really a killer. So what we have to do is we have to learn to forget ourselves. Forget all labels that you may have attached to yourself: professor, doctor, researcher, teacher, doctor, architect. Forget names, forget labels, and just focus on being a human being that is alive to the moment. Tolerate ambiguity. Learn to embrace uncertainty without judgment. Deleuze and Guattari talk about ways of thinking that embrace uncertainty, and they have an analogy for anarchic thinking, which they call the rhizome. They encourage us to think anarchically, non-hierarchically, and open and unstructured, and see where it leads us, almost like a rhizome under the ground that sends out shoots, and not knowing where they are going to go, but not stopping any of them. So very chaotic, free thinking. And the South African architect, I also wanted to include this, that it's also very important to be a beginner. Always have the attitude of beginner. Be prepared to view what you are tackling as if you are a child and not knowing a thing. Beginner's mind has many possibilities, but the minute you label yourself as an expert in something, you confine yourself to that field, and you actually lose that sense of anarchic thinking. And very often cross-disciplinary ideas give rise to the freshest insights. William Kentridge is a South African artist who works this way and writes about his process. I love his work. He literally talks about tracks of peripheral thinking, and he tracks them wherever they go. He doesn't stop them. He listens to things at the edges. I urge you to read his work if you're interested in this thing. And he embraces uncertainty, changing materials as he goes along. Here he's in dialogue with himself. This is a video on YouTube where he describes his creative process to himself, and then he answers in a kind of a challenging way. So he's constantly doubting, casting little seeds of doubt into his process so that it is open and fresh and fluid and never ending. He established the Center for the Less Good Idea, which is in Johannesburg. It's a safe space. And the idea here is that once you've chosen a good idea, there are always hundreds of other less good ideas which deserve attention. And he encourages creators to come and explore those less good ideas. That's Georgia O'Keeffe again. The third principle underlying creative intuition is focus on the particular. So I quote Krishnamurti here, this beautiful, beautiful verse where he writes, so how do you observe a tree, this marvelous thing called a tree? Can you watch a tree or a star or the heavens without the word? Because the word is not the actual star or the actual moon. So can you put aside the word and look? And this is exactly what I mean by it requires a focus on concrete and the particular. The intellect, remember we said, conceptualizes, labels, categorizes. Intuition works holistically and directly with reality, which is very, very complex and consistently changing. But this is not how we are brought up to know the world. We, since childhood, we've been taught words and symbols and ways of communicating, and this is the language in which we think and in which which is dominant in our lives. In the age of computers and screens, it's even more so. We more often have the screen as a filter between us and reality. And as far back as the 1960s, Jung warned that we were becoming alienated from our instinctual roots and from reality. He said, thinking is replacing being. And we have lost sight of an intuitive way of being in our world. This was in the 1960s, Jung brought it up. Albert Einstein also, he's quoted here by samples, saying he called the intuitive mind a sacred gift. And he added that the rational mind is actually a faithful servant to intuition. It serves to verify or to check. And he said it's paradoxical that in modern life, we've begun to worship the servant and defile the divine. The poetic form of haiku is a beautiful example of this focus on the particular, concentrating on direct experience of reality. It deals with nothing special, everyday moment-to-momentness. It's a very simple and direct expression of being alive. And the inventor of the form haiku, Basho, says that in order to write haiku, get a 3-foot child. So again, calling us to go back to a very childlike way of seeing and being in the world. And we know Picasso said every child is an artist, but the problem is how to remain one once you've grown up. When we experience reality in an unfiltered way, we engage with body, mind, and heart, and we get ideas from just focusing at the exclusion of all other thought, focusing on what we are engaging with. And through this, we make extraordinary and unusual connections, maybe through memory or fantasy. This is where our unconscious and all these stored memories and things come up when we quieten the rational mind and engage. The intuition cannot work simultaneously with the rational mind. We have to quieten the rational mind. The fourth principle is that emotion is really important, and we fuse with reality through emotion. Emotion is at the core of what it is to be human. Although we may feel intellectually in control, there is no doubt that our emotions affect the way we perceive reality. Emotions dissolve hard categories that the intellect creates. Emotion moves us into action. It causes us to value certain things over other things, and emotions are a vehicle for intuition. So we have to acknowledge emotion in the intuitive process. So Bergson identifies two types of emotions: infra-intellectual, which is the result of thought. So things like boredom, anger, when someone says something and you get angry. So those are infra-intellectual, but I'm more interested in the supra-intellectual. These are emotions that cause thought. They give rise to ideas. They're transformative and have an impact. You remember the emotion and the association as something significant. So supra-intellectual emotions. And these emotions are entirely unique to you. So I can look at something and you can look at something or a movie, and you will feel completely different emotions to those that I feel, because you haven't experienced what I felt in the past. You don't have my baggage that I bring along with me, and neither do I have yours. So emotion is entirely unique. It is personal to you. And this personal emotion is what E.E. Cummings talks about when he says, the moment when you feel you're nobody but yourself. To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human can fight. So you got to remember to be nobody but yourself. So I'm going to give you an example of an encounter with a thorn tree. You can walk past this thorn tree day after day and not really get much from it. But if you encounter the particularity of this thorn tree with an expanded consciousness, your body, your mind, your heart, and you dwell on it, and you exclude rational thinking, you can really start reflecting on the sculptural qualities of a thorn tree, the feathery-like leaves, the beautiful sculptural qualities of those thorns. You can look at the textures. You can also start creating associations. You can feel the sharpness of that thorn without even touching it, and you can, by feeling that, you can imagine the birds which impale their victims on these thorns. You can imagine that thorn going through your skin, which leads to the thought of how fragile, how paper thin your skin is, which gives rise to ideas of vulnerability. And so these creative ideas grow from one another through this direct encounter and fusing through emotion. It's really a beautiful experience of participatory emotion. Paul Klee writes of his experience walking through a forest and feeling that the trees are looking at him rather than the other way around. He talks about being penetrated by the universe, inwardly submerged and buried. Then through the act of painting, he claims he was released. Klee was literally inspired by his surroundings. The word inspirare coming from breathing into the trees. He breathed in the trees and he breathed out the painting. Picasso also talks about a fullness and an emptying. He talks about getting an indigestion of greenness walking through a forest and then emptying the sensation into an image, releasing himself. So the first peoples of the world, our first peoples, have known this all along. They know about intuition. They know about interconnectivity, that we are connected, and they understand reality as a dynamic, interpenetrating flow. But in contemporary society, we've lost sight of that. We've become abstract individuals. We've distanced ourselves from direct experience with reality through our preference for conceptual thinking. But Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Zen have so much to teach in this regard, describing these states of oneness and indivisibility. These philosophies have largely been ignored by the West until the relatively recent discoveries of quantum physics. Scientists such as Schrödinger and Bohm have argued strongly for, I quote, a blood transfusion from the East, saying that the plurality that we perceive is only an appearance, it is not real. So where does that leave us? In conclusion, then, I would like to leave you with these thoughts. Life is flow. You can't stop it. You can't hold on to it. You can't control it. You have to become open and receptive in order to deal with that flow. And the way we do that is by immersing ourselves in process. We need to let go of ourselves, forget about ourselves, become the medium that we are working with, whether it is a musical instrument, paint, or words, if we're working with words. Whatever it is, immerse yourself, lose yourself in the process, and enter what Henry Miller calls the anarchic and purposeless river of life. Forget yourself. Be open and receptive. Get out of your own light, says Aldous Huxley. Engage with things directly, not by naming and intellectual thinking, and become really skilled in your medium. The more skilled you are, and the more experience you have with a certain medium, whether it's words or paint or laboratory stuff, the more you can immerse yourself, and you don't have to think about the skill or the process. You can really engage intuitively. So skill, building up of skill is really important in order to be able to engage intuitively. Allow yourself to become empty so that you may become a conduit for this flow, this flux, which connects us to the rest of the universe and the rest of life. Immerse yourself in, I'm just going to go back there. Immerse yourself in only one thing at a time. Meditation is a kind of immersion. David Lynch talks about how transcendental meditation has enabled him to access deep levels of consciousness, which he calls catching the big fish. Steve Jobs learned to meditate in India and writes about his experience of slowing down his mind and seeing a tremendous expanse in the moment. So through a wordless and thoughtless connection with reality, you make space in your mind. But if you find it difficult to meditate, just jump in, begin it. It will give you direction. So important. Give yourself plenty of time. And Dr. Sawyer mentioned this in the keynote today. He said it's all about process, it's all about time. It doesn't happen instantaneously. You might get an insight, but for that to ferment and develop into something takes time, sometimes longer than you actually know. But the most important thing is to give yourself time alone. Solitude, extended periods of solitude are really important, away from society, expectations, and norms. Give yourself a safe space. Kentridge calls his studio a safe space for stupidity. Allow yourself to be stupid and make mistakes. Experiment without fear of judgment. And it also, being alone enables you to identify with your emotions in a very uncompromising and honest way. And so that you can reconnect with what Mary Oliver calls that wild, silky part of yourself as you go deeper and deeper into your inner world. And this time alone is precious, because if you're interrupted, that once you've started weaving your skills, your intuitions, your feelings together in a very, very fragile thread or web, interruption takes all that away. So you need extended periods of time alone. I'm going to finish with a quote by Osho, the Indian philosopher, who says that creativity is a very paradoxical state of consciousness and being. It is allowing something to happen through you. It is not a doing, it is an allowing. It is becoming a passage so that the whole can flow through you. It is becoming a hollow bamboo. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I just want to thank you, Teresa. It has been a fantastic hour listening to you.
Thank you.
It's amazing. It was beautiful.
Thank you, Margarita.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I want to know, are you an architect as well? Because I didn't listen all your...
Yes, I'm trained as an architect. I've discovered that I'm also an artist. I paint and I draw. And I am a teacher. I taught at university for 30 years. I'm now a professor at the university here at the University of the Free State. So I'm many things. I'm a dancer as well. So I've experienced intuition in many, many ways. I'm largely speaking from experience, but my research, my PhD wanted to demystify it, because, you know, when you talk about intuition, people think you're getting all woo-woo. So I went to the philosophers and the scientists and got the hard stuff.
You're very inspiring. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Margarita. Marlies?
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Hello again.
Hi.
So it's so wonderful to hear your insights. And my question is, thinking about the embodiment of trauma.
Yep.
And I don't know whether that has come through as a sort of thread in terms of that intuitive knowing and what the gifts are that lie in that space, because I think as artists and as creatives, a lot of people almost have that thread that pulls through their work. And I don't know whether you've explored this as well.
Marlies, I haven't, but I think it's a very interesting area of exploration, because creativity using your intuition would be extremely healing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not clued up in that field. I can recommend that you read Dawn Garish's work. I don't know if you've come across her.
No.
Garish, shall I type it in the chat?
That's very lovely, thanks.
Dawn, she's a Cape Townian. She's a medical doctor as well as an artist and a healer. Mm-hmm. She's a very interesting woman, and she deals quite a lot with trauma and intuition.
Yeah, it just feels like a natural way of using your insights in a not to directly face trauma, but to almost
heal
through the doing of the art. It's like that beautiful the creative spirit that comes through.
Absolutely. You just connect, you plug back into the mothership almost, you know, you just plug back into that net of creative energy.
Mm. So thank you.
Thank you. Leonie, you had a question.
Yes, I comment on a question actually. That was a really interesting presentation and really good work. I also have a PhD in intuition.
Wow, I'd love to read it. Cool.
Not creative intuition though. I did intuition in entrepreneurship. But
entrepreneurship, okay.
Yes. So, but there is some overlap.
I wondered why your name was familiar, because I have come across your work.
Oh, thank you.
In my research, I thought your name was familiar, and yes, I have come across your work. So thank you.
Thank you. I found
Did you get something from this in terms of
Absolutely, no, I did. It's really interesting because besides entrepreneurship, I also teach creativity. So this kind of bridges the gap quite nicely.
Awesome.
So obviously there are some similarities and differences between my operationalization and your operationalization. And actually what I wanted to ask is, what is the role of knowledge and expertise in your conceptualization of creative intuition? Because from the entrepreneurship perspective, there's different types of intuition, and the creative form of intuition is not reliant on knowledge. And I didn't quite understand whether you are looking into knowledge as a prerequisite.
I did mention, I did mention, I think if I understand you correctly, to become proficient in whatever it is that you're doing is really, really important. To master the skills of your medium, whether it is entrepreneurship or painting or singing or composing or working in a lab. You know, if you are really proficient and competent and skilled, there is space for intuition. You don't have to still worry about, am I doing it right? You know, should I use green or should I use blue? Should I use this brush? You're free then to, so the acquisition of skills is really important. But the rational process cannot coexist with the intuitive process. They operate, like I mentioned when I spoke about Wallace's process, you know, it's a mysterious dance between rational and unconscious, letting go, picking up.
That is, I think, where we diverge a bit, because I look into cognitive versatility, we call it, as in how can entrepreneurs make use of intuition and analysis, perhaps not in the same moment, but you know, in a particular task that requires an element of both. How can that be used in tandem?
I understand
but I don't want to take up too much time, but maybe we can connect and carry on this discussion later on. Well done, Teresa. Thanks.
Yes,
any other questions?
You, everyone. I'm actually going to have to wrap up questions now to allow for Dr. Wolfberg here. He is presenting shortly, but I encourage questions. If Teresa, you want to put your email or any other forms of communication, so if anyone else has more questions.
I'll put my email in the chat, and you can find all my details on my biography of the Wova app. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, Teresa. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, it was fascinating. I wrote like 2 pages of notes.
Oh, that's so cool. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it, because you must listen to lots of things. I'm just writing my email intern.co.uk. There we go. Chung. There it is.
Perfect.
But people should be able to get hold of me anyway. Okay, I'm going to leave. Thanks so much for being a really cool room monitor. You made me feel at ease. Cheers.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad. It was great to meet you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Hello, Dr. Wolfberg.
Hi. Do you exit this session and then have to restart it, or?
No, it's just a running session all day, so we're good here. And I'm actually going to pass this on to Ilana. She's going to be your room monitor for the session. Hi, Ilana.
Ilana, I would like to just see how my display looks on my computer. Can we do that?
Yeah, that should work. Let's see.
So I'm going to share. Let's see what I have here. Yeah.
It should let you.
Yeah.